To discuss the country's recently released crime stats, I'm now joined by senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute, Dr. Jean Redpath. Dr. Redpath, appreciate your time this afternoon. A number of issues to talk about when we look at these stats, the murder rate, the geographical distribution of crime, vigilantism and mob justice, mass shootings, just so much to unpack. But let's start off with that number, 7,700 murders in the last 3 months of last year.
Yes, I mean, that is quite a scary number. And what we can do is we can actually add up the figures for the whole of last year, 2023, and we get to a total of 27,172, which puts our murder rate very, very high, in the high 40s, maybe even 50 per 100,000, which is much, much higher than it was in 2019, before the lockdown period, which had a profound impact on the country. What is particularly scary is if you compare the figures for 2019 to now nationally, there's a 30% increase in the number of murders. In Gauteng, it's 45%.
Now, the Western Cape MEC for Police Oversight, Regan Allen, says that part of the reasons that certainly the Western Cape has seen a rise in these numbers is because of the special remission order that saw thousands of offenders freed from prison last year. In your view, is this a contributory factor to those numbers?
It certainly is. It was quite remarkable that indeed on the weekend after that special remission occurred, in central Cape Town in particular, there were a number of incidences which were then tracked to people who were released. So it is not a factor that can be discounted, and such releases should happen in a whole-of-government way, where other branches of government are informed, where there's protection, where there is a system to receive people who are being released, so they're not just released into nothing. And none of that is in place. Obviously, we cannot keep people in prison forever. However, if at points where we are going to release people, especially if it's an early release, then special measures need to be taken.
Dr. Redpath, I want to focus a little bit on criminals or reoffenders, if you will. What are some of the factors that result in criminals, if you call them that, committing crimes again after being released from prison? Is it specific to certain crimes? Is a murderer less likely to murder again than, for instance, a pickpocket?
Well, I think one has to be very careful about thinking about criminals. All of us have committed an offence at some point in our lives, whether it be getting a partner or something more serious. So let's be careful of using that kind of word. And I think one has to be very clear that there are very many different situations in which people commit crimes. And I think what this criminal justice system has to be most careful about is those who are serial offenders, so that these are people who commit offences many times, and particularly when it is in an organized fashion, because you can be very, very sure that they are going to commit crimes again. And so the system has to recognize when we are now dealing with someone who is going to be a repeat offender and make very sure that that is taken into account in sentencing and in ensuring that those people are removed for as long as possible. Not everyone is going to be a serial offender. Some people are in situations, unusual situations or in stressful situations, and things happen. But particularly when we're looking at organized criminality, such as hijackings that are organized and cash and transit heists, those people who are also involved in the copper theft syndicates, those people are highly likely to commit crimes again, and they are highly likely to be relatively ruthless, and they're in it for the money and nothing else.
So just a point of clarity, you've suggested that criminals is not the right term, even though we do talk about criminal justice reform. So what is the politically correct statement? So do we refer to them as offenders, repeat offenders?
I would say someone who's committed a crime, somebody who's committed a crime. And, you know, we have many people in our society who may have committed a crime in the past, and who have reformed. So it's to call them a criminal forevermore because at some far distant time in their youth that a crime has been committed is not conducive to our nation actually healing. If someone is labeled as something, then they tend to live up to that label. And we have to be very careful of that. On the other hand, we have to recognize that there are some very, very dangerous people in our society. And we have to be clear that those people must be arrested, they must be prosecuted, and they must be sentenced appropriately, taking into account what a danger they are to society.
Now, vigilantism and mob justice, Dr. Redpath, has been an issue in our various communities. And I'd imagine that one of those reasons that you have mob justice is because people are invariably infuriated by the crime that has been committed for a start, or they have no faith in the justice system.
Certainly, that is one of the very important factors. I think the figure is something like 5% of all of our murders are, in fact, vigilante killings. But one also has to think about the sort of brutalization of our society, where violence has become normalized. And we really need to get beyond that situation where the response to violence is more violence. And until we do, we're going to be in a very serious situation. I've seen some very disturbing footage of vigilante groups torturing children, for example, because they've committed a crime. Now, that is going to only make things worse. It's not going to contribute to the healing of our society.
I'm glad you raised that issue because you probably would have seen the video that's been circulating. In fact, it's something that we covered in one of our reports yesterday, where a 9-year-old, I believe, was kept for 7 hours by adult males, and they tortured him. Your reaction to that sort of offence?
Well, one has to think about how did it even come into their minds to do such a thing. So the immediate thought is it must have happened to them at some point. And you can see how the cycles of violence repeat themselves. So somehow, as a nation, we have to break the cycle of violence. The response, we cannot continue to play out these violent scenarios that have happened to us or that we've seen happen to someone else. We have to break the cycle and respond differently. A 9-year-old who is committing a crime such as, I believe it was theft, they are extremely vulnerable, and that is why they are committing the crime. So we address the vulnerability. We do not torture them as a society. And unfortunately, our people have no faith that the criminal justice system, that social workers, that anybody is going to do anything. And so they resort to what is known, and that is to repeat the cycles that they themselves may have experienced or seen.
Dr. Jean Redpath, Senior Researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute of Africa Criminal Justice Reform. Appreciate your time this afternoon.